Hello and welcome to episode 49 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago, I gave up my live streaming career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. This week I'm joined by the wonderful singer-songwriter and now published author, Kathryn Williams. Not only is she a massive Paul Weller fan, but Mr. Weller has also called out a love of her music on many occasions as well. Now, prepare yourself for this one, because there are so many brilliant stories about Kathryn's life, links with Mr. Weller, and a proper exclusive that will also have you creased up with laughter, I'm sure. Let's get into it. Kathryn Williams, thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I love this little window into your life because I'm zooming in here on your home studio by the looks of things.
Yeah, this is my little, I don't know if you can see, if I tip it up a bit.
Yeah.
And I'm in, we call it the Elf Hut, and it's like my little sort of shed next to the house where I do co-writing and work up my demos for records and things.
Nice. So you wouldn't record an actual album here. This is like your work in progress space, is it, to then take it somewhere else?
It's not soundproofed. I mean, quite a lot of things end up on albums from here when they've been cleaned up and all the bird songs been taken off. But I worked with the producer Head on my early albums, and he said to me, then the best advice for someone who writes a lot is to not get a proper studio, just get somewhere where you can get ideas down so you don't get sucked into the sort of tech of it all. And another engineer who I used to work with called Dave Morn told me that you can't polish a turd. So basically what it means is that, like, you get all these ideas out, and if they sound good in a raw and sort of sketchy state, then the good ones will rise to the top instead of you trying to sort of make better the ones that aren't as good.
Love it. Oh, I'm so looking forward to talking to you, I have to say. So thank you for joining me on the podcast here. To kick it off, obviously there's so many of your bits and pieces that I'm going to talk through which link into Mr. Weller. Which link into Mr. Weller. So we have to start off, as it is the Paul Weller fan podcast. When did you first become aware of the music of Paul?
I was born in the 18th century, so I'm an early Paul Weller fan. Well, you know, I grew up with the Jam, and even at school, discos, dancing to the Jam, and always feeling that it was sort of dangerous and edgy. And then there was the Style Council. And then when he started doing his solo stuff, it really fed into the music that I was into, like the sort of American singer-songwriter, you know, like Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, even Paul Simon, that sort of weaving of like acoustic instruments. So he's always been on my radar. A lot of people I know have worked with him, and a photographer that I work with has always taken photos of him, Tom Sheehan, and always said he was a nice bloke. And so we sort of crossed paths like a bit over the years. But yeah, so recently, a bit more of that.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in a sec. That would be lovely. But you grew up with a love of music and those artists that you talked about. But when was it you realised that actually you could do this thing? Because there's a difference between just playing songs and being able to write songs. You worked out quite early on that you were pretty good at both.
The short answer is no. And I was sort of ill as a child. I got like this glandular fever, and I started sort of writing as a way to sort of writing and drawing as a way to sort of get through the sort of bed days, because I was like bedridden for quite a long time. And then when I went to university, I had a guitar and I secretly played songs. And then when I was on the dole after university, I was in a big house, and they'd heard me playing through my bedroom door and booked me onto this songwriters night. I don't know why I didn't say no. I mean, that's sort of the sentence all the time of, I don't know why I carried on doing that. I don't know why I said no. I went and did that show, and then I got booked for another. And then on the third, it was just like I think there was some sort of music event going on, but someone from the Enemy came up and saw my show. It was only 3 songs, and wrote about me in the Enemy. And then London Records offered me like studio time, and it sort of snowballed, and I was going to go with a label. There was lots of labels wanting to go with me, and then I just thought, I'm going to do it myself. Even then, sounds like I was confident, had no idea why So I set up my own record label, and that was before even MySpace was going. So there was not a lot of people doing that. And I made a record and put that out, and it got really praised. And then I thought I'll do that again. And then on that second album, which was Little Black Numbers, it was on my label but got nominated for a Mercury Prize. And the BBC followed me around, and it all kind of went stratospheric. And that's when the imposter syndrome really kicked in. And and I found it difficult to leave the house, and I just kept thinking that someone was going to come up on stage and say, "You're not qualified to do this." Wow. But by that time, I was on a major label, and so I did 3 albums, and then I've just kind of accidentally stumbled into the music world.
I mean, for me, the discovery of you would have been that album, Little Black Numbers, which was a magical LP. It's a beautiful thing. I still love listening to that now as I put it on lots. But I actually think it was Paul Weller who introduced me to that album. I'm sure it was because I'm sure it was like an interview in Q or something where he was talking about some of the stuff that he likes, and that came up. Would that ring a bell for you? Is it him recommending you around that time?
I think he's known my stuff for a while. It's really nice because, like, getting to know him a bit more over the last year, it's just become apparent how much of a fan of music he is, and a champion he is for people who he likes, and like young up and coming artists. And it's quite rare, you know. A lot of people like to sort of just close in and sort of just talk about themselves and their projects, and he's like massively generous in that way. I mean, recently with the thing was it Mojo?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this. So Paul Weller edits Mojo Magazine in June, and put Heart-Shaped Stone in his top 10 45s, currently stacked in his inner jukebox, is how it's played. But a big Weller favourite, they say, yeah? Yeah,
and I got a text from him at like 2 a.m. a little while ago, just saying that they'd been listening to a song of mine called Sequins that I wrote with Ed Harcourt on the big speakers, and that it was just brilliant, and he wanted to let me know that it was an amazing song and hats off. And I was like, I woke up to the beep, and then I was like punching my husband going, it was just so exciting. So exciting. Like, I was like, see, I deserve breakfast in bed now.
What's he in your phone as? The Mod Father? Mr. Weller? Have you got a nickname for him?
Booty Call Weller. No. No, just Paul Weller. Just Paul Weller.
That's Paul Weller.
Yeah.
And since that bit where, like you say, it goes stratospheric and becomes a bit scary, I would imagine. I can't imagine being in that position where suddenly you're kind of, like you say, you're performing and doing those 3 songs to suddenly, you know, everybody's talking about your album, and you got the press camping out and all that. But there's this brilliant catalogue of loveliness of albums from you that kind of follows. And I'd love to talk to you about lyrics because, you know, Old Low Light, Over Flyover, Leave to Remain, The Quickening. I mean, these kind of come around quite quickly, and you're kind of churning through material. But these are fabulous songs. But for me, it seems like, and it links in with Paul, I think, the time that you spend crafting words, it seems to me that you put a lot of effort into that. They really come across these kind of honest lyrics that actually mean something.
It took a long time for me to realise that, to admit, like in a taxi or something, when someone said, "What do you do?" and I'd say, "Oh, I'm a musician." And I'm thinking, I am really not a musician. I mean, I still 20 years in the business and I still can't bar chord, and I still think that I'm inventing new chords when someone comes and says that's a D6 diminished. I'm like, oh, I thought that was my chord. But the lyrics thing is always been a big joy for me. And it's only over the last few years of writing for lots of other artists in like Sweden, Norway, France and America that them saying that I was good at it made me go, oh, but I thought everyone could do this. So I've been thinking about it because of last week as well, writing with Nashville writers who churn songs through, and having a day with those sort of people and having the lovely feeling like you're running down a hill and it's quick and it's fun and it's easy. Because when I teach songwriting as well, it's not the same as like writing a book or writing poems. There has to be other elements with it. And it's kind of like a puzzle that you have to solve yourself, and you only write the way you write. But there's some really fundamental and interesting things that happen with my head that I get this bing moment. It doesn't have to be the perfect word, but it has to be the right shape. And if that shape fits in exactly with the way the melody's going up or down, or the scan of a line, and it feels effortless. I mean, the big thing is like, you might be sort of putting tons of hours in, but you don't want someone to think, oh, that was a really hard lyric to write. You want it to feel like, I never want to just be someone to think, oh, that's clever. My interest is only in connection and in either putting a picture in someone's head or making it fire off a memory for them or an emotion. So they're sort of the things that I'm playing with when I'm writing lyrics. And when you're co-writing, it's about a conversation. So like if we were co-writing now, we'd just start talking like we are, and I'd want to know what you're thinking about now, or if there's some sort of thing that you want to explore or a time in your life. And then I'm old school. I have like books. So I'd just start writing and then circling bits that work. And then from that, you start carving into the shape of the song. Once you've got the song in a kind of structure and you sing it through, then that's when you hone in again to work out if the right shapes or if the right words, and just really craft it so that it's like tight. Sorry, I've just gone off on one.
Oh man, that was so lovely. Chris Difford talks about how a couple of songs he'd written particularly come within like minutes. So like Call for Cats, I think, in Up the Junction came in like 5 minutes flat, bang, the whole thing done. And yeah, Paul talks about this with That's Entertainment. It was just something he kind of just rattles through 10 minutes. I'm not sure how true these things are, but are there songs like that which do come kind of really quickly and you just get it down and you go, it's pretty much there?
Yeah, absolutely. They're like the gifts you sort of get. And it's almost like that when you daydream and are not quite sure what you're doing and you pick up a guitar and then this melody just falls and the sort of words come out, and it's almost like a radio switches on in your head. And they're brilliant and they're usually the best, which is kind of the most annoying thing about it. Because they're you don't even feel like you've tried, and
yeah, there's no effort gone into this whatsoever, and bang, there it is.
Yeah. And then there's a song that you've worked on for 4 years, and it like might make a B-side.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are gifts, those ones. And you can get a mixture of the two as well. You can get ones that like come sort of pretty much fully formed, but they don't quite have the lyrical film that you want inside. I know that from working with Paul with a song over the last couple of weeks, I know that what he likes to do a lot is he likes to jam in the studio and just see where it sort of goes. And he works very sort of in a sort of free-form way where the structure reveals itself over playing round and round. And that's because mainly he's got friends. Whereas I just sit with my guitar and all the chords that I've invented.
Yes, your own chords, yes.
Yeah, and sit in my studio and just mess on.
But that hasn't always been the case, though. So on this podcast, we've learned quite a lot about how sometimes those songs will be him working on demos and taking them into the studio, and then the band that he was with, whether it was Bruce and Rick in the Jam, the guys in the Style Council, or the solo years, and then pretty much being done and ready to go, and then them working on them. Whereas it does seem now, like in the past few albums, the past few years, is a bit looser and will just want to go into the studio, spend more time at Black Barn, and we'll talk about Black Barn because I know you've been there, and just kind of play around like you say, and then let's see where we get to, which is obviously a different way of working entirely, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's so great that he's got that space because he can make his own stuff there, but I mean, he also has studio speakers and a place of his own to like really immerse himself into other music. And I know when I've been there, he's got like loads of vinyl and stuff, and they do a lot of listening in the studio as well. And there's kind of nothing better than being in a recording studio listening on the proper speakers, and you can hear every detail and the panning and the placement of like all the instruments on a song, and you just get this. It's almost like, like widescreen. It's like going to a cinema versus watching on the telly,
Yeah. I need to take you back to 2004 to an album you did called Relations, which was lovely. And there's something that you have in common with Paul Weller on that album, and I don't know if you know what it is.
What is it?
It's Birds. So Paul did a covers album the same year. Studio 150 was his covers album. You did Relations, which is brilliant. There's some love. I mean, your version of All Apologies by Nirvana alone is just worth the price for that album. But songs like Tim Hardin, I love. The Leonard Cohen, Hallelujah. But Paul did a covers version, and again he picked some pretty left field songs like you have, I think, in parts. But you both did Birds. You both did Birds, Neil Young.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Prefer your version, just so. What was what was it about that song?
Well, I've listened to Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young and Neil Young for years and years, and I love the way Neil Young, he sort of uses broad brushstrokes for lyrics, but the way he places it with the melody, you just get swept away. And I think that song, it's like lying on your back and watching clouds go over your head. And I really love that sort of feeling. And I wanted to sort of emulate that and see if I could get that similar feeling on a re-record. I mean, with Relations, I'd had a really difficult tour, and I'd been supporting someone who had previously supported me, and then I'd gone on to support him, and he'd sort of gone stratospheric, but he was like not a very nice person. Obviously, I won't name names.
I'm now trying to guess from the list of people that I've got that you've worked on top with.
Their sort of meanness and bullying on tour, not just to me, but to other people around that person, it really got to me. And I had not a breakdown, but I was like pretty shook up from it, and I thought, I don't want to do this, don't want to be in the music business. If it's full of people like that, I'm not interested. And so I just stopped, and then friends were coming round and play records and stuff, and then we slowly started thinking, oh well, this is a really good way to fall in love with music again and to maybe get back in the business. So it was a sort of healing thing, and it was a healing thing. Sorry, that sounds so knobby. But it was. And so we just started listening to loads of songs and then picking them apart. And it was like kind of being like a watchmaker or a clock fixer or something, where we'd have the song and we'd go, right, what are these elements? Pull them all apart and then see if we could put it back together and do something different with it that showed the song in a new light. I think when people do covers often, it's like Robbie Williams doing the American Songbook or something. They've got this lovely old horse that's like this beautiful song, and they're just sat on it, whipping it, like, and they want, it's like they want to ride this beautiful beast, but for their own ego, and just not interested in that. And I suppose the songs that I chose weren't particularly the songs that represented my musical catalogue or what I wanted to do or who I wanted to sort of praise. It just didn't work that way. In the same way as, like, if you look around your life and you see who is in your life and the friends that you've got, you're like, well, this isn't particularly who I would have chosen. But, I wouldn't change it. Yeah. But this is just what's happened. So there were certain songs that I tried, a few Dylan songs, I tried a few Joni Mitchell songs and like things like that. But strangely, the Nirvana was something that we could do something different with, or a Bee Gees song or Ivor Cutler. And it just felt like it was more interesting that way.
Yeah, it's so interesting because Studio 150, like I say, was released the same year, which was Paul's covers album, and he talks exactly the same way. It was about like, what can I do differently with the songs? How can I, put them together? And to the point that he's covering like Sister Sledge, Wishing on a Star. Whereas actually, if you thought Paul was going to do a covers album, you'd think it would be, Small Faces and the Beatles. And that seems a similar thing. It's like, well, that's pointless. Why would he do that? I was going to talk to you about live performance, and I had a list of the people you toured extensively with, solo and with bands. chance, but I feel awkward reading them out now in case I've given anything away. But people,
no, I'm going to do a poke face.
Yeah. People like David Gray, Damien Rice, Ray LaMontagne, Beth Orton. I wanted to ask you a couple of things about live performance. So one was, and I hope you don't mind me digging into this, but we've talked a little about kind of mental health and anxiety as a performer on the podcast with others. And I read somewhere that you never used to have set lists at all, but then would also have like panic attacks occasionally on stage. Was it always an uphill struggle to perform live in that way?
Early on, it was ridiculously difficult for me. Even now, looking back, I was thinking, wow, with the first few albums, I used to sit down to perform on stage with the band. And I would sit down because I would black out with nerves. It was chronic. And I feel looking back now, like, why did I carry on? If it was that bad, why did I carry on? And I don't have an answer for that. But, yeah, I mean, with the Mercuries being on stage, all of that sort of stuff, I said no to going on Jules Holland because I didn't think I could do it. I said no to going on to Richard and Judy because I was a massive Bill Hicks fan at the time, and I was just determined to not suck Satan's cock at any point. But now, if there was a Richard and Judy and they asked me on, I would get down on my knees. No. But yeah, so it was tough because I was riddled with paranoia. I was a big dope smoker back in the day, and the paranoia, I didn't sort of put two and two together that maybe that wasn't helping my mental state. And I wish I'd learned to write set lists. I would go on stage and not know what was coming next and be panicked by it. And all I needed to do was write a set list. But it was just not knowing. I must have been an absolute nightmare for the band that I was with. Every time we were about to go on stage, I was like, I can't do it. I couldn't sing with anyone in the studio when we were recording. They'd have to sort of only have the engineer in the studio. I mean, I just sound like a prima donna, but it was all so fundamentally terrifying for me. And then I got pregnant with my first son, Louis. And I remember I was on stage with Ray LaMontagne supporting him. And I think it was Shepherd's Bush Empire. It was a big tour, and I was quite pregnant and feeling quite motherly. And the paranoia and nerves just sort of clicked off. I think I was like, oh, right, well, there is more important things. It's not all about me. And, I've got a baby in here. How is that going to get out? Bigger questions and bigger worries. And then I suddenly it just sort of flipped that I was like, what if people aren't wishing the worst for me in the audience? What if they're wishing the best and wanting me to do well? And that sort of, it was like a sort of snap revelation, and that really helped my nerves. And I still get ridiculously nervous. I'm kind of good one-on-one chatting, but I'm not an entertainer. I'm a songwriter who performs what I've written. I don't live for the applause. I'd be quite happy just singing my songs to just you.
Well, that would be perfect. So let's make that a plan in future. And back to Paul, when was it you first had an actual connection with him? Because I know about the People Powered gig, the Concert for Corbyn gig was 2016, but I'm guessing it was before that, would it be?
Well, sort of. No, not really. I mean, there was people who knew him who I knew, and vice versa. But there wasn't really much direct contact. I mean, I live up in Newcastle, and there's a big difference between being in music to make music and then being in music to know everyone in music. And so I kind of just keep my head down and get on with work. I don't know tons of people. So yeah, the Corbyn one was a big thing because he was playing with
so Robert Wyatt and Danny Thompson, The Farm and Weller. This was People Powered, Concert for Corbyn, Brighton Dome, 16th of December 2016. And you'd have thought, given how his view on Red Wedge now, you would have thought this was the type of thing that he'd probably have avoided.
Well, I think I'd done a Momentum gig previously in Liverpool, I think, had Steve Pilgrim on it. There was other stuff like that. And that was for the NHS, for fundraising for the NHS and also for Momentum. And then the Jeremy Corbyn one, I think it was like just to sort of show unity for him, to sort of try and build up the momentum of his campaign, I guess. Yeah. And I think Jeremy Corbyn had faults, and I didn't find him a particularly brilliant speaker. But there's a difference between brilliant publicly and then being a good human. And I know because one of my best friends was Jeremy Hardy, and him and Jeremy Corbyn were very close. And I'd always known from Jeremy what a good person Corbyn was, and that he was always on the right side of history. So I was happy to be there and part of it. A lot of my friends thought I was an idiot for sort of getting involved politically for something, but I was happy to be there. And I got to see Robert Wyatt. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, so he retired at that point, hadn't he? So he came out of retirement just for the gig. And I didn't get to go to that one, sadly, but did him and Paul get to play together?
It was amazing. Yeah, they were on stage together, and Danny Thompson was there. I've done a few shows which Danny was involved with in the past. I mean, I just sort of stood at the side of stage to watch it. It was what a joy. And Paul was basically just sort of supporting Robert Wyatt, massively. You could feel just what a great guy he was there. And I reached out and said, I thought that was brilliant. And then the woman who had organised those events, she put me in touch with Stone Foundation because they were looking for someone to do a shared vocal. And I said, oh yeah, I'm up for it. I've not really heard of them or anything. And so I travelled down from something I'd done in Scotland all the way down on the hottest day of the year down to Blackbarn to sing that song. Yeah, so that was the first time I properly met Paul and everyone and was down there. And I was so boiling, it was ridiculous because I'd driven all the way and I'd driven 7 hours without having a wee. And so the first thing I was thinking was, one, what do I say to everyone because I've not met them? But the first thing I did say was, hi Paul, where's your toilet? I was so desperate. And then that sort of broke the ice. And then he made me a cup of tea and I thought, well, that's nice. And then we got to it. I've got a picture. The only picture I have of me and Paul Weller is from that day when he was there, and it was so hot. So he's got no top on, and he's got his arm around me, and then the photo sort of cut off waist height, and I've got like a shirt on. I showed my husband, and he was like, well, it looks like he's got no top on, and you've got no trousers on. So that's not going on to any social because it does look just ridiculously awful. But so that's just for me.
You make it sound like the John Lennon and Yoko Ono wedding album. That album, the cover where they're completely naked.
Well, maybe I should have taken my top off just to be polite.
So go on, what was it like to record at Blackbarn then? So this was Stone Foundation for their album Everybody, Anyone. The track you did together was lovely. It's called Don't Walk Away. So what was it like working with? Did you know the guys before that point?
No, I hadn't known them, but they're just all really nice. I mean, what you find with people in music is that the most talented ones don't feel a need to prove themselves or be anything but who they are. So once you find those sort of people, then you're fine. You just, really nice lads. Got on. The studio was great. It was just like a sort of vintage gear heaven, with these standing lamps and rugs, and it just felt really comfy. And I did the take in a couple of hours and then just got back in my hot car and left.
And this was 2018, so around this time, Paul's releasing albums like, the Jawbone soundtrack and True Meanings. And I know you're a big fan of both those LPs, and particularly the songs, The Ballad of Jimmy McCabe from Jawbone, which is lovely. And you love Gravity as well, don't you?
I am massive fans of both of those songs and Aspects as well. There's just something that's just like the sort of stuff that I completely love. I know it's not going to be like his greatest hit, like the biggest hits that he has, but I just the scope that he shows with that album True Meanings, it's like proper classic songwriting and the orchestration in that as well. You know, Hannah Peel, he worked with Hannah Peel, didn't he? And she's an absolute genius. And that collaboration between the orchestration and those delicate, beautiful, intricate songs. Yeah, I just absolutely love that album. Massive fan.
I could hear a version of Aspects from you for your next covers album, I have to say. I think that would be lovely.
Oh, let me write that down.
Yeah. Little idea there. Going back to Stone Foundation, you also performed that song live with them, Islington Assembly Hall, and Weller was on stage for that gig at the same time as well. So did you see him backstage? Was there any conversations that night? Can you remember?
Yeah, we did see him backstage. Well, I was there with my husband and kids, and they couldn't stay for the whole show. They were in a hotel opposite because it was getting late. But Paul was just really, really nice to them. And they were playing with a ball, you know, throwing it up against the wall. And he chatted to them and threw the ball. And he was just really nice with them and lovely with me. He's just a decent guy. And anyway, so they went back to the hotel. And then my husband texted me and was saying, Louis going crazy because he says that the man that played ball with him is on the telly. And so I think there was some sort of big show on that night on telly, the same night as the Stone Foundation gig. And my son was like, but he was there and now he's in this. So it was like, yeah.
Oh, funny. I love it. There's a few more things I want to dig into before we go, and I'm aware of time, so I'm going to get through them quickly. I have to talk to you about David Rotheray, and I love this guy, and I don't know where he is now, but Homespun was a really big band for me back in the day with him and Sam Brown. But there was this wonderful LP that I encouraged people to dig into, which was called The Life of Birds. And I felt like this was just a couple of years ago, and I looked, it's like 2010, which just makes you realise how quickly time flies. But you sang on a song, Crows, Ravens and Rooks, and you did the cover artwork for that album as well. It's a terrific album. I know you're only on one track on it, but that's really lovely. What was it like working with him?
It's great. Yeah, I think he had lyrics and I wrote the music for that. And then the cover, yeah, I just threw him some art because that's what I'm meant to be doing. That's what I'm qualified for as an artist. So I throw that stuff to people and hope that gets to places. But so I did that album, and then he did another album which was sort of reinventing songs.
From the other viewpoint, wasn't it? Or the reply to somebody. That's right.
I did a sort of reply to Roxanne for that album. But yeah, he's great and he's good for collaborating. God, I haven't spoken to him in absolutely years. But it's good, that album.
Yeah, it's good. No, I like that. And I loved Homespun with Sam Brown's coming on the show, and I'm a big fan of hers as well. But the other thing I was going to ask you about was the recent stuff, so bring it bang up to date, where March 2021, you publish your debut novel, The Ormering Tide. You're now a published author. So tell me about this.
Ormers are like a sort of abalone shellfish. And there's only an ormering tide is when the sea goes out really far and really low, and it sort of glimmers and shimmers, and it sort of reveals things that were hidden before. And that's the one time that you can go out and fish for ormers. The narrator is a girl called Roselle who lives on an island with her family, and at the start of the book the eldest brother goes missing, and so it's trying to sort of find out the mysteries of that, but it's sort of written from her viewpoint, so it's how she sees the world and how she sees nature, and so it's kind of a bit poetic-y. Prose.
Love it. Before we started the podcast, we were talking a little bit about the songwriting retreats that you have run and work with others. And Chris Difford, I know, works with you on that at times as well. How is your approach to writing a novel different from how you would teach or how you would write songs yourself?
It's really, really, really hard. So I had the idea for this book about 6 years ago, and it took on many forms and got loads of editing. And the difference with, I can sometimes on a co-write day, I can write 4 songs in a day. And just the sheer volume of a book, like you have to come to it like a job, you have to come to it and write. And I ended up editing about 40,000 words of stuff that didn't end up in the book. And so it's like people who write more than one book, I just think they're mental.
They know, too much time on their hands, clearly. Well, they do.
Well, it does. It completely takes. So, because I had my songwriting and I'm a mum, I knew that I wanted to write this book, and I didn't want to be one of those people who was like for 10 years saying, "Oh yeah, I'm writing a book." And I didn't know how to write a book, so I sort of learnt on the job of writing and learning as I went. And so what I'd do is I'd take the kids to school, and then I'd get back into bed and type all day. And then at like 2:15, the alarm would go off. And then I'd race around the house and hoover, tidy, clean, and look like I'd been doing that all day. So I just did that for like a couple of years without getting found out and secretly writing a book. And then strangely, it's really good.
And it's out into the world as well, which must be lovely actually seeing your products out there as an actual physical thing as well. Because with music now, everything's MP3, isn't it? It's all Spotify streaming and all that. But to have a physical product in your hand that you can flick through is brilliant.
I know. It even smells good. Yeah, it is beautiful. And I miss that with the physical thing. I mean, I've got an album coming out this Christmas with the Poet Laureate Caroline Duffy. And we're going to make that into a little sort of book with a CD. So it is a physical thing. But I mean, even in the studio, when you're recording, I always like to stick whatever we've done in the computer onto 1/2 inch or something. So that it actually enters as a physical thing in the real world. I miss that.
It's funny, since I started the podcast, and a bit like your secret book thing, I've started buying vinyl again. So I had the vinyl, then I moved over to CD because we were all told that CD was better quality and it's indestructible, it lasts forever. And then, MP3 was the future. So I converted all my CDs. I got rid of pretty much all my CDs because that was going to be, it's all going to live in the cloud. It'll all be fine. And then I realized that's complete bollocks, and it's the sound quality isn't anywhere near as good. And we were all conned, quite frankly. So now since this, I've started getting vinyl, but my missus doesn't know. There's a record player arriving tomorrow. She's going to go, "Why have we got a record player?" But having the physical thing of vinyl and being able to read through the lyrics and look at the artwork and all that, I think it's so lovely, isn't it? I've completely forgotten what that was like.
Yeah, sorry, you said something and I had to write it down. And if it ends up in a song, I'll let you know.
Okay, all right, okay.
My husband's the same. He's sort of enlisted in this. There's a company who just send you a vinyl every 2 weeks or once a month or something, and you don't know what it's going to be. And so we've been doing that, and that's really exciting. And we've like discovered some great stuff like Big Thief and Jane Weaver. We got into her through that.
She's great. Yeah. That's another Weller recommendation. She did a remix on Sunset as well. I love that world of discovery. It's so exciting, isn't it? So getting back into the physical product. It's a Christmas album coming out. I know that people after listening to this podcast will Google you and your greatest hits will come up, which isn't your greatest hit. So there might be a little bit of confusion around there as well. But that's your most recent album, studio album, wasn't it? Which was talking of novels, actually, a collaboration with a novelist. So it was it's a beautiful album, again, obviously from you, but that was a really interesting project.
Yeah, I mean, the record label still haven't forgiven me for making an album called Greatest Hits that's not my greatest hits. But that was the title of Laura Barnett's book. And it was a fictional character who's looking back on her life as a songwriter. And each chapter starts with a song. So we co-wrote those songs together for the book. And then I made a fictional greatest hits album that went alongside the book. And so as you go through the book, the songs have sort of meanings. And then when you go back to the CD, you know that it's autobiographically from this character. So it was really chewy, really interesting thing to do. And I loved it. But if people I think a lot of the songs that Paul Weller has liked of mine of recently has been from the album Crown Electric, which has got Heart-Shaped Stone and Sequins and Picture Book. And then the album that I did with Ed Harcourt, which was Hypoxia, based on Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar. So that's another book thing. But yeah, I've got a new album coming out that I've sent a few tracks to Paul over Booty Call Weller, which is an album I've done with Ed Harcourt, which is like coming out in March, and that's massive. It's like really epic with like strings and big guitars and quite different to stuff I've done before.
Oh, that sounds brilliant. Yeah, I love Ed's stuff as well. He's great. I love that. So you were down at Black Barn recently. Are you able to, is that linked in with that, or is that a different project entirely? Are you allowed to tell us anything like that?
No, so I'm writing a song with Paul, and hopefully we're going to be like singing that together. But, whether or not it makes the cut of a record, who knows? But it's good fun.
What's that process? Is it you taking lyrics in and working with him on them, or just jamming in the studio like you mentioned earlier?
Well, I can tell you I can tell you my embarrassing story, because who's going to listen to this? I mean, it's just doing me on a phone call, isn't it? So the first thing, oh God.
I'm really looking forward to this now.
So the first thing that happened was Paul was saying, we should write a song together. And I was like, I'd love to. And inside, I was like, oh my God. And so he gave me a title and said, I think we should write something on this idea. And I was like, all right, I'm going to think of this title. So that week, I went down an absolute rabbit hole from the title, like going in National Geographic. Like I must have read and written, there was 20 pages of idea lyrics. And I was like, I've got some ideas, casual. Next thing I did was like put a melody to that. And then the next thing I did was come in my studio, put the track down, do backing vocals, put like mellotron, double bass. Like basically, I made a whole song in a week because I was overexcited.
With no involvement from him whatsoever at this point, apart from the title.
Exactly. And then sent him it, and he said, well, this is really great, but I haven't done anything. And I just was so overexcited that, Paul Weller asks you to write a song with him. And basically, I didn't write a song with him. I wrote a song at him. So I did that. And then I was like, I'm really sorry. I've written a song at you. Can we please start again? So I think he found that amusing. Just because I wanted to show him that, like, I was a hard worker and that, like, I could get on with something. But I just, even now, my butt is clenching with the embarrassment of it. So we've started again where he's been jamming this track and then he's been sending me different versions of the jams of this track. And then I've been writing sort of lyrics and ideas, and we've just been going back and forward and slowly building it that way.
Nice.
So, which is, the way it should be done.
That's collaboration right there, yeah.
Yeah.
Is this over mobile phone? How do you send each other files and things?
Email, phone, stuff like that.
Oh, this is so great. Love it. I love it. And a little hint into maybe what's coming next from him in a way, because I've heard he's collaborating with a few different people. So I don't know whether this is a project or whether it's just actually lots of single things. I read the other day that he's never going to do another album. So who knows what's going on in the well.
Yeah, I read that just after the text he sent me of a song together. And I was like, oh, okay.
Jazz Cafe next year. There's a lovely Weller Connection reunion, Monks Road Social. I don't even know if you know this is still a thing because I think it's been moved around a couple of times because of COVID. But there's a gig where a Jazz Cafe, Dr. Robert, Mick Talbot, Neil Jones Stone Foundation, Matt Dayton, Steve White, Jack O'Peak, and yourself and others. This is going to be such a great gig. I'm really looking forward to this. I got tickets, but tickets are still on sale for this. This is nuts.
Well, the fact that you called me half an hour before this podcast to let me know it was happening and I didn't know, if you could do the same for me with this gig when it happens, that would be really useful. Yeah, I really loved being part of the Monks Road Social. Dr. Robert, he was great. Everyone who was part of that just had just a vibe of fun, and it's like going into the studio to see what happens, trying each other's different things out. I know Matt Dayton from doing retreats with Chris Difford, and actually on the new album in March there's a song that we wrote together, me and Matt, so it was lovely to hang out with him, and in the downtime of that day in the studio, me and Matt wrote another song. It's just nice because you feel like there's a community of people, and I think it's more and more about that sort of connections and having a family around you and making sure everyone's okay. I mean, I have that from the retreats that I put on like a few years back, you know, people like Magic Numbers and Steve Naive, and yeah, just like lots and lots of people coming to those retreats that I hosted the way Chris does. And those relationships are still going on. And it's like, oh, do you know someone who can play bass? Or is there any good venues you could recommend? And it just becomes like looking after each other, because it's tough. It's tough in the music world at the moment. You know, there isn't money around. There's a lot of people who are working, musicians who, you know, just haven't had the work. I've got a friend who's an amazing drummer, and, you know, he had to give up his flat in London and move onto someone's sofa in Ramsgate. Just, you know, there isn't the money around for keeping people going.
And not a huge amount of support coming either, which is the frightening thing from government and things like that. So I'm really looking forward to that gig, I have to say. It feels like a bit of a who's who of people who have come on the podcast as well, which is going to be nice. So I'm hoping I can get to chat to some of you as well when we're there. But I have two final questions for you, Kathryn, before you go. This has been so lovely. I thank you for your time. You are allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. Which one are you going to go with?
I think it'd have to be Wildwood or Gravity, I think.
Okay.
There's just, or Aspect. Oh God, it's too, no, that's a mean question.
Tell me what it is about Wildwood, because we've touched on the other two. What's special about that song for you?
I'm not a folkie. I mean, like, I don't do old fashioned folk songs, but everyone in the pop world calls me folk and everyone in the folk world calls me pop. But I'm always interested in the idea of a wildwood or a greenwood of a place where things happen. And I think he was maybe touching on that. And I just like the jamminess of it. The you can tell that it's been sort of people in a room playing together, and it has that groove that takes you through, just like walking through a wood. So
nice.
And
one that he's still doing now. He did it at the Barbican gig the other week. Final question for you then. The purpose of this podcast is not only to meet lovely people like yourself, but also to get that meeting and that interview with Paul Weller that I never managed in my radio career. If it happens, what should I talk to him about? Is there a question you think I should ask him, or a topic you think he'd appreciate?
Oh, I didn't realise that this was the sort of manifesto.
That's the end goal, yeah. It's called Desperately Seeking Paul, this podcast.
Because I did a gig a few years back. It wasn't in Spain, but it was in an island near Spain, and it was called Waiting for Waits. And he'd done it like for years and years, and he got people to come and do a Tom Waits cover. But like the whole hope and point of it was that Brilliant. He was waiting for Tom Waits to come over. So it's a similar, thing.
It. Oh, imagine this as a live concert every week. Wow.
Well, have you asked him?
Well, no, not really, no.
Well, what the hell are you doing talking to me? All you have to do is just give him a call and say, do you fancy a chat? My God. I mean, that's what I would do.
You're right. It's a lot of effort to get to that end goal, isn't it? It's hours of worth of conversation.
I need some bread. Shall I go to Asda, or shall I start growing wheat?
And talking to everybody who's ever grown wheat.
Yeah.
Or likes wheat. He's a fan of wheat.
Yeah.
Oh, dear, brilliant. Kathryn, I've loved every second of this. It's been an absolute blast. I can't wait for the new album. So March 2022, we're saying?
Yeah. So the Christmas album with Carol Ann, which is sort of guilty pleasure of like 70s Christmas top of the pops hits, and then my sort of dark, big Ed Harcourt record in March.
Wow, I can't wait. I cannot wait, I have to say. Thank you so much for joining me, Kathryn. Have a lovely day, and cheers for the time.
All right, my love. See ya.
Well, there you go. My thanks once again to the magnificent Kathryn Williams. Some brilliant and hilarious stories in that episode. Thank you so much for sharing, Kath. I really do appreciate it. Fantastic. And I encourage you to dive into her music immediately. Wow. What a back catalogue. Check out my show notes for links too. Now, next up on the podcast, we hear from a fan who is so crazy about the live Paul Weller experience that he's created a new initiative called Love Weller Live. we'll chat with Steve Wheatley on the next episode of the podcast. Now, don't forget, you can subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcasts. Do make sure you leave a review and share on social media. You can also buy me a coffee if you fancy and find out information about all my guests in the show notes for the podcasts. You can find me on Twitter @WellerFanPod or on Instagram and Facebook. It's Paul Weller Fan Podcast. I'll see you next time.